What would you do if a 9-year-old boy with duct tape on his boots claimed he could make your paralyzed child walk again? It sounds impossible, right? Yet in Birmingham, Alabama, on a cold morning, this is exactly what happened. A boy named Zeke, with nothing but a notebook and belief in his heart, changed a family's life forever. Stick around to see how one small act of faith can spark a miracle. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow the journey. Zeke Carter wasn't like any other child Jonathan had ever seen. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't even look like he wanted to be noticed. But there he was, sitting on the cold, cracked pavement outside the hospital, sketching quietly in his worn notebook, while the world around him moved on. Rushing, desperate, distracted. No one ever gave him a second look, except Jonathan. Jonathan Reeves had just finished another grueling day at the hospital with his daughter, Issa. She was 6 years old, once full of life, climbing trees, running through the yard, chasing her. Cousins. That was before the accident, before her world shattered in a single instant, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. For the last few months, Jonathan had been drowning in a sea of medical appointments, tests, and diagnoses. The doctors were kind, but their words were always the same. "It's a long road, Mr. Reeves. Miracles take time." But time was something Jonathan didn't have. Issa's silence, her stillness, it haunted him. Every day it seemed as though she was slipping further away from him, from her life, from the joy she once knew. And Jonathan, despite all his wealth, his status, felt powerless. That day, as Jonathan carefully carried Issa through the revolving doors of the Children's Medical Center, his eyes caught something unexpected. A boy, no older than 9. Zeke was sitting on a flattened cardboard box, his oversized coat swallowing him, his boots held together by duct tape, his face partially hidden beneath a red beanie. He didn't beg for help. He didn't cry out for attention. He simply watched. There was something in Zeke's gaze that stopped Jonathan in his tracks. It wasn't pity. It wasn't sympathy. It was something else, something unshakable. The boy looked at Jonathan as if he saw right through him, right into the hopelessness that had been weighing down on Jonathan's soul. Zeke stood up slowly, still holding that notebook close to his chest. "Sir," he said, his voice clear, firm and surprising for a child so young, "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze. Not because he was offended or confused. No, it wasn't that. It was how Zeke said it. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a desperate plea. It wasn't a sales pitch. It was as if Zeke knew something Jonathan didn't. As if he had the power to fix everything Jonathan had long since stopped believing could be fixed. "What did you say?" Jonathan asked, his voice tight. "I said I can help her walk again," Zeke repeated, his expression unwavering. Jonathan's grip tightened around Issa, who was still silent, her head resting on his shoulder. He looked down at Zeke, sizing him up. Dirty clothes, taped-up shoes, and a worn notebook. A child with nothing, asking for everything. His instinct told him to turn away, to walk inside the hospital and forget this strange moment. This strange boy. But something about Zeke's words, something in the air shifted. "That's not funny, kid," Jonathan muttered, moving toward the door, trying to dismiss the feeling growing inside him. "I wasn't joking," Zeke said, stepping forward. Still calm, still serious. There was a stillness to him, an almost adult-like steadiness in his small body. Jonathan walked into the building, shaking his head. What was this? Some kind of scam? Some kind of joke from a homeless kid looking to get something out of him? He tried to focus on the appointments ahead, the updates from therapists, neurologists, and specialists, but through all the sterile clinical language they used to manage expectations, one voice kept echoing in his mind. Zeke's voice. "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan's thoughts were a mess, his heart heavy. He couldn't. Stop thinking about that boy. How could he say something like that? Why did it sound like he truly believed it? The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. By the time afternoon came, Jonathan was ready to leave the hospital. The sun had broken through the cold clouds. casting a weak light over the streets, but the chill still lingered. As he wheeled Issa to the car, there he was again, Zeke still sitting on the same cardboard box. The boy's eyes locked with Jonathan's, as if he knew Jonathan couldn't forget him. He stood up slowly, and once again he spoke. "You came back," Zeke said softly. Jonathan's patience was wearing thin. He stopped. "Why would you say something like that?" he snapped. "You think this is funny?" Zeke shook his head, slowly. "No, sir, you don't even know her." Jonathan felt his anger rise, but it quickly faded when he saw Zeke's calm face, his unshakable belief. "You don't know what she's been through. You don't know what we've been through." Zeke didn't flinch. "I don't have to know her to help." His words were simple, but they hit Jonathan harder than he expected. "You're what, 9?" Jonathan scoffed. "What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter?" Zeke looked down at the ground for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. When he looked up, his voice was quiet but firm. "My mama used to help people walk again. She was a physical therapist. She taught me stuff. She said the body remembers things, even when it forgets for a while." Jonathan was silent, taken aback. Zeke's mother had been a therapist, a healer. Jonathan didn't know whether to believe him or walk away. But there was something about Zeke, something that made him wonder if this kid could be more than just a figment of his frustration, more than just a wild hope. Zeke wasn't asking for money. He wasn't selling anything. He was offering something far more precious, his time, his belief. And in that moment, Jonathan didn't know if he was walking into a scam or a miracle. But he was too curious, too desperate to walk away. He sighed. "Fine, 1 hour. Meet us at Harrington Park tomorrow. Don't be late." Zeke nodded once, his expression unchanged. "I'll be there." As Jonathan drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Zeke was still standing there, hands at his sides, eyes locked on him. The boy wasn't just standing on that street corner. He was standing at the edge of Jonathan's shattered world, ready to turn it all upside down. The next day, Jonathan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as the wheels of the SUV crunched over the gravel of Harrington Park's dusty parking lot. He glanced at Issa, who sat in her wheelchair beside him. She was quiet, almost too quiet. Jonathan couldn't tell if it was because she was nervous or just exhausted from the constant round of failed treatments and endless waiting. Her eyes, usually so full of light, were dull now, a reflection of the toll the accident had taken on her. "I don't know why we're doing this," Jonathan muttered, staring at the park ahead of them. His words were meant for himself, but he couldn't help noticing the faint furrow in Issa's brow as she looked out the window, her small fingers tracing the rim of her wheelchair. She didn't answer, not that he expected her to. It was hard for Issa to believe in anything anymore, especially after months of endless therapies that led to nothing. She had lost so much, her freedom, her independence, her childhood joy. How could she believe in a stranger, a child no less, who claimed to have the power to change everything? Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. His thoughts kept returning to Zeke. That damn boy, that damn promise. Every fiber of his being screamed that it was ridiculous, that he shouldn't trust a kid in taped-up boots with promises of miracles. But something about the way Zeke spoke, his calm, unshakable belief, it gnawed at Jonathan's gut. It was like Zeke knew something the rest of them didn't. They arrived at the park a few minutes later, and Jonathan helped Issa out of the car, wheeling her toward the designated spot under the old oak tree. As they neared, Jonathan spotted Zeke, sitting on the same bench, his notebook now tucked away and a small gym bag placed at his feet. He stood as they approached, a slight smile forming on his lips as he saw them. "Hi, Issa," Zeke said, his voice light, warm, as if they had known each other for years. Issa gave him a small nod, not quite smiling, but her eyes brightened just a little. Jonathan tried to swallow his frustration. "So, what exactly are we doing here?" he asked, keeping his tone steady, though doubt crept into his voice. Zeke didn't seem fazed by the skepticism. Just the basics, he said, kneeling down in front of Issa. We start with some heat for your muscles, then I'll show you some stretches. It's about getting your body to remember what it's supposed to do. Jonathan crossed his arms, unwilling to relax. He couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was a waste of time. But something kept him there. Something deeper than just the desperation in Issa's eyes. Maybe it was the small spark of hope that had started flickering in his chest, against all odds. As Zeke began his work, Jonathan couldn't help but notice the other families quietly arriving, drawn by the rumors of a boy who could help their children walk again. It wasn't just Issa anymore. There were other kids in wheelchairs, some with walkers, a young girl recovering from a stroke. They all gathered around the old oak tree, watching, Zeke with a mix of hope and disbelief. Just as Zeke was placing a warm rice pack over Issa's thighs, a middle-aged woman approached Jonathan. She was a regular at the park, someone who had seen Jonathan and Issa countless times before. Her name was Sarah, and she was a neighbor. Her son had been in a car accident years ago and had never fully recovered from the trauma. Sarah had always been the friendly, ever-smiling kind of woman, but today there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" she asked quietly, looking at Zeke and Issa. "I've heard about that boy. People say he's been helping kids around here, but I don't know. I don't want you to get your hopes up too high." Jonathan looked at Sarah, his jaw tight. "I don't know what to think. He's just a kid. What can he really do?" Sarah glanced at Zeke, who was now talking softly to Issa, guiding her through small stretches. "I get it," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I've seen him around here before. He's been helping people for months now. The word spreads, and you start hearing stories. Kids who could barely move their legs. Now they're standing. Some of them are even walking. It's strange, but it's real." Jonathan stared at Zeke, his mind a battlefield. Could it be true? Could this boy with nothing but a broken notebook and a few simple tools really have the power to help Issa when the best doctors couldn't? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jonathan, you have to understand. It's not just what Zeke does. It's how he makes people feel. He doesn't promise things. He doesn't make grand speeches. He just shows up. He helps. And sometimes that's enough." Jonathan shook his head, but Sarah's words hung in the air, stubborn and undeniable. He had been so caught up in his skepticism, in his own fear of false hope, that he had never stopped to consider the most important part of Zeke's work, the simple act of showing up. And then it hit him. He'd been so afraid of getting his hopes up, of opening himself to the possibility of failure, that he hadn't noticed the most important thing. Zeke wasn't just offering a cure for Issa's legs. He was offering something even more valuable: belief. Zeke's belief in Issa, his unwavering certainty that with time, patience, and care, her body could remember how to walk. It was something Jonathan hadn't even realized he was missing until now. The belief that everything could change. Issa's small voice broke the silence, pulling Jonathan from his reverie. "Dad," she said, barely above a whisper. I think I feel something." Jonathan's heart raced. He turned to Zeke, his eyes wide with disbelief. Zeke nodded, encouraging Issa to keep trying, to keep believing. In that moment, the air around them seemed to shift, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath. The tension hung thick. Was this really happening? Could Zeke, with all his simplicity and faith, actually be the answer they had been waiting for? Jonathan didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if Issa would walk again. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel quite so alone in this fight. And that, in itself, was a miracle. As the days passed, Jonathan found himself caught between two worlds. The world of doctors, specialists, and prescribed treatments, the cold, sterile realm that had become his daily existence, and the unpredictable, unexplainable world of Zeke Carter, the boy with taped-up boots and a promise of miracles. It was an uneasy mix. Every week, Jonathan watched Issa struggle, growing frustrated with each small movement that didn't come. Her muscles seemed to have forgotten how to work. The Doctors reassured him that healing took time, that recovery from such trauma was a slow process. But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness, the fear that maybe they were all wrong. Maybe Issa's legs would never work again. It was then that Zeke's words, spoken so simply, came flooding back to him. "I can make your daughter walk again." The first time he'd heard them, Jonathan had dismissed them as nothing more than the naive wish of a child. But now, with each passing day, those words took root. Zeke hadn't promised anything grand or impossible. He hadn't made empty promises like so many others. He simply believed in Issa's ability to heal, believed that, with time, her body would remember. It was that quiet faith that kept tugging at Jonathan's insides, making him second-guess everything he thought he knew. He couldn't deny it anymore. The boy had been right. He had already seen small changes, Issa's legs moving just a fraction more than before, her feet twitching with a sign of life that had been absent for months. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Jonathan a glimmer of hope. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long, but the doubt was still there. The fear of the unknown. What if Zeke was just another well-meaning kid who would end up breaking Issa's heart, like the others who had promised miracles before? What if he wasn't prepared for the pain and frustration that came with trying to heal someone as broken as Issa? The following weekend, Jonathan and Issa returned to Harrington Park. The sun was shining, the air warmer than usual for this time of year. It felt like the kind of day where anything could happen, like a moment was coming that would change everything. As they arrived, Jonathan noticed a small crowd had gathered. Families who had heard about Zeke's miraculous claims, people who had seen the videos, the photos, the word of mouth. It wasn't just Issa anymore. There were other children now, sitting in wheelchairs or using walkers, watching Zeke with a mix of hope and skepticism in their eyes. Their parents hovered nearby, whispering among themselves, wondering if this young boy could really offer something their children needed. Zeke was already at the oak tree, his usual spot. He was sitting with his gym bag beside him, carefully setting out his makeshift tools, the warm rice packs, tennis balls, and the soft cloths that had become his tools of healing. When he saw Jonathan and Issa approach, he stood up and greeted them with that same quiet, confident smile. "Hi, Issa," Zeke said, as if seeing her walk wasn't just a possibility but a certainty. Issa managed a faint smile, her eyes still uncertain. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan felt his heart tighten. Every time Issa looked at Zeke, there was a mix of hope and hesitation in her eyes. She wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that she could walk again. But the fear of disappointment, the terror of trying and failing, was something she carried, like a weight on her shoulders. "Are you ready to try again?" Zeke asked, his voice steady, never pushing, never demanding, just asking, patiently. Issa hesitated. She glanced at Jonathan, her father, searching his face for any sign of reassurance. But Jonathan knew he couldn't give her that reassurance, not this time. All he had left to offer her was his presence, his belief in this strange, unlikely boy who had shown up in their lives. Zeke knelt down beside Issa, gently lifting her blanket. From her legs, placing the warm rice packs over her thighs as he had done many times before. The tension in the air was palpable, like the park was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jonathan stood off to the side, watching as Zeke moved with an ease and confidence that seemed impossible for a boy so young. Zeke wasn't doing anything miraculous. He was simply helping Issa to reconnect with her body, moving her legs gently, encouraging her to feel her muscles, to remember what it was like to move, to walk. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was something more than the empty promises of doctors and specialists. But as the minutes ticked by, Jonathan felt the familiar pang of doubt creep back in. What if it wasn't enough? What if Zeke was just another false hope? He could feel the eyes of the other parents watching, waiting, expecting something to happen. The pressure was mounting. The expectations were too high. Issa's face contorted in frustration as she tried to move her foot, her small body shaking with the effort. Nothing. She stopped, panting slightly. tears welling up in her eyes. Jonathan felt a pang of guilt twist in his stomach. He couldn't help but wonder if it was wrong to let Issa believe in this, to let her get her hopes up only to watch them crash down again. "I can't do it," Issa whispered, her voice breaking. Zeke looked up at her, his face filled with understanding. He didn't push her. He simply nodded. "That's okay. We'll try again next time. You're doing great." But Jonathan saw the hurt in Issa's eyes. He saw the frustration, the disappointment that she couldn't seem to escape. He watched as she looked away, staring at the ground, trying to hide her tears. It was then that Jonathan felt the weight of the moment, the weight of all the months of helplessness, all the days spent in hospital rooms, all the quiet moments, at home, waiting for something to change. He had promised Issa he would never stop fighting for her. But what if fighting wasn't enough? What if this boy, with his duct tape and simple tools, was the only hope left for his daughter? And just as the silence between them stretched on, something shifted. Issa looked up again, her eyes red from the tears. She didn't speak, but she reached out, her small hand trembling as she placed it on Zeke's shoulder. "I want to try again," she said, her voice stronger now. There was a resolve in her that hadn't been there before, and for the first time Jonathan saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. Zeke smiled at her, his calm presence unwavering. "We'll take it slow," he said, "but I believe in you. I know you can do it." The moment hung in the air, suspended in time, the weight of everything Jonathan had been avoiding. The fear, the doubt, the helplessness was there, in his chest, heavy and real. But now as he looked at Issa, he realized something. This wasn't just about walking. This was about fighting. This was about the belief that even in the darkest moments there was still something worth fighting for. And for the first time, Jonathan felt like he might just be ready to fight again. For Issa, for Zeke, for hope. Weeks turned into months, and as the season shifted from the sharp cold of winter to the budding warmth of spring, so did Issa's progress. Jonathan couldn't quite remember when he stopped questioning Zeke's ability to heal his daughter and started believing in it himself. It had happened slowly, like the tender growth of a flower pushing through the earth. But now, standing in the park, watching Issa move her legs with more confidence, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. Zeke had become a fixture in their lives. Not just a miracle worker, but a teacher, a mentor, and even a friend. The little boy who had nothing but faith, who wore duct-taped boots and a beanie too big for his head, had taught them all that the body could heal. But it was the heart that needed the most care. Zeke's belief in Issa's strength, in the power of patience and persistence, had sparked a fire that no doctor's diagnosis could ever ignite. Jonathan watched as Zeke gently coached Issa through another round of stretches, his calm words filling the air with quiet assurance. Issa's foot moved once more, not just twitching but lifting off the ground, if only for a moment. The crowd that had gathered around them, families with children in wheelchairs, with walkers, and those who had heard of Zeke's gift, watched, in awe as Issa's smile widened. It wasn't just the progress in her body. It was the sheer joy of believing again, of seeing a dream that had seemed impossible inch closer to reality. "Do you feel that?" Zeke asked, looking up at Issa. Issa nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, I do." Jonathan stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, his heart racing. He had watched this journey unfold from the very beginning, and each time Issa made a small movement, each time she took a step, literal or metaphorical, it felt like he was witnessing a miracle. But now, it wasn't just Issa who had been healed. It was him too. The weight he had carried for so long, the guilt, the fear, and the hopelessness that had defined his every thought for months. Those heavy chains were breaking apart. He had come to realize that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about learning to believe, to trust, and to show up, no matter how difficult it felt. Zeke had shown them all the power of belief, the kind of belief that didn't require proof, didn't require guarantees, but instead asked for trust in the process and in each other. He had believed in Issa before anyone else did. He had believed in her body's ability to heal, even when she herself didn't. And in return, Issa had learned to believe in herself. It was a lesson that Jonathan had taken to heart as well. Belief was the key, but it had to come from within. He had spent so long searching for answers outside, in doctors, in therapies, in experts. But the real answer was simpler than that. It was the belief in the power of human connection, in the strength that existed in the most unexpected places. Zeke helped Issa slowly stand. Jonathan stepped forward. His voice was thick with emotion, his chest tight with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and awe. "Zeke," he said, his words barely above a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. You've given us more than I could ever put into words." Zeke didn't respond at first. He just looked at Jonathan, his expression calm, knowing. Then, with that same quiet certainty, he said, "I didn't do anything, Mr. Reeves. I just showed up. And so did you." Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Zeke was right. It wasn't the miracles that mattered. It wasn't the big, grand gestures. It was the small moments of showing up, of believing when it seemed impossible, of giving someone the chance to believe in themselves. That was the true miracle. Zeke had simply given them the space to hope again, and that, in itself, had been everything. The park was quieter now, the families who had gathered standing in reverent silence, as Issa stood tall, her legs trembling but strong. Jonathan smiled softly, wiping a tear from his cheek, though he wasn't sure when it had appeared. It was the first tear he had shed in months, and it was full of gratitude. Gratitude for Zeke, for Issa's courage, for the hope that had slowly been restored. The word had spread. More families arrived each week, some looking for a miracle, some simply looking for a way to heal. Zeke welcomed them all, never asking for anything in return, never seeking the spotlight. He worked quietly, diligently, helping every child, every family, just as he had helped Issa. And through it all, Jonathan stood beside him, learning more than he could have imagined from a child who had lost everything but still gave so much. One Sunday afternoon, as the sun began to set and the park emptied out, Jonathan found Zeke sitting on the same old bench under the oak tree. The boy was sketching again, just as he had when they first met, and for the first time, Jonathan understood why. Zeke was still a child. He still carried the loss of his mother with him, still wore the old jacket that she had called his helper's coat. But he had given so much of himself, and in doing so, he had built something far more valuable than fame or recognition. He had built a community, a family of people who believed in each other. Jonathan sat down beside him, a quiet understanding between them. "Zeke, you've changed everything," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Zeke didn't look up. He just smiled to himself and replied, "I didn't change anything, Mr. Reeves. We did, together." In that moment, Jonathan realized that Zeke wasn't just healing Issa. He was healing them all. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt like they were all going to be okay. They had come to the park looking for a miracle. But what they had found was something even more powerful. The power of belief, of connection, and the strength to keep showing up, no matter the odds. The sun set slowly behind them, casting a warm, golden light across the park. And as they sat there together, Jonathan knew that no matter what the future held, they had found something worth holding on to, a hope that couldn't be broken, a belief that would last forever.